A now debunked New York Times article reported that Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick was bludgeoned to death on January 6, setting the tone for the entire Democrat narrative for all of the events to follow. But one person did die. That's Ashli Babbitt, an Air Force veteran who was protesting that day.
That's right. This is a story the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about and has largely ignored, but she did die at the hands of a Capitol Police officer, no less. And her story is far from over.
So here to unpack her family's fight for justice is Blaze News investigative reporter Joe Hanneman. So, Joe, you wrote about Babbitt's death for the family's wrongful death lawsuit for theblaze.com. So let's start with a big picture. Let's go back to who Ashli Babbitt is and remind our audience about this story.
Sure. Ashli Babbitt came to D.C. like, tens of thousands of others or hundreds of thousands of others to hear the president speak, and had concerns about the election, but also she had really become quite a fan of President Trump. She's often portrayed as some sort of QAnon nut, but the truth is she once voted for Barack Obama. So this was not somebody who was an ideologue. So, but she did like President Trump and came to the ellipse to hear his speech. She and her husband ran a pool cleaning company in San Diego. And so he stayed home while she went out to D.C. by herself to hear the speech. Ashli is a 14-year Air Force veteran. She was a military policewoman. She also was in the Air National Guard in the same role. So she had a lot of experience in dealing with crowd control, dealing with unruly people. She guarded terrorists in the Middle East as part of her duties. So she did come into the Capitol about 2:23 p.m. that day and just kind of flowed with the crowd. There were thousands of people in the building at one point. And then she ended up in the hallway right outside the speaker's lobby of the House. And that's when all of the trouble started.
Yeah, and go into that. I mean, because this is a story that I feel like a lot of our audience knows about, but even then, it's just not talked about enough. It's not allowed. The story isn't allowed to be told in mainstream media, other than that it was justified that she was shot that day.
Right, and so many untruths have been told about her. You'll see her referred to in mainstream media as a rioter. Well, the truth is she wasn't a rioter. Not in any sense. She did not do any rioting. She didn't vandalize anything. She didn't assault anyone. She didn't try kicking in doors like some of the people that were surrounding her in that hallway. So she was the first one to enter. She came in with an independent journalist named Taylor Hanson. They walked in very informal, light as a breeze, and started chatting with these three police officers who were guarding the door. But within seconds, a large group filled in behind them, and it got very loud. And then a provocateur named Zachary Alam stepped to the center and just started to create chaos, yelling and screaming, saying he was going to F up the police. And then he turned around and started punching the glass with his fist, very close to the heads of the Capitol police officers. So he was taunting them, and Ashli tried to deal with him. She tried to get his attention. She put his hand on him at one point, and he brushed her away. And so she went over to the side while he continued to escalate everything. And then this went on. It seemed like a lot longer, but it went on for about 5 minutes. And when he finally took out the far right side light window with a riot helmet, like a giant hammer in his hand. When he smashed that out, that's when Ashli grabbed him by the backpack, spun him around, and gave him a left hook to his nose and knocked off his glasses. And then almost immediately, she went up into the window and was shot by Lieutenant Byrd. And Zachary probably was going to go up in that window, and he would have been shot most likely if she had not done that. So she really put an end to the rioting, although she tried to stop it while it was going on. She told the police, you've got to call for help. She told them to call for backup. So she was an anti-rioter, and yet she gets so much vitriol as being part of a mob, but she really was not.
So, Joe, let's bring it back then to present day and the family's wrongful death lawsuit. What's the latest there? What's going on?
Well, they have reached, as you'd say, a tentative agreement or an agreement in principle, a settlement agreement in principle that was announced about 10 days, 2 weeks ago in federal court. We don't know any of the details, but I think that negotiations have probably been going on for quite a while. Once President Trump was sworn back into office, he's taken a very particular interest in her case, and I suspect behind the scenes has pushed the Department of Justice to come up with some sort of a negotiated settlement. So right now they're waiting for Aaron Babbitt and his attorneys to react to the latest draft that was sent to them by Department of Justice, and then they have to file an update with the court. But we've had a couple of hearings in May that were absolute circus. The judge really has a thing for the Judicial Watch attorneys, and she was shouting at him in two hearings in a row in May. You'd almost describe it as a scream. It wasn't quite that loud, but it was very loud. And she thought that he was talking over her, disrespecting her. But whenever they have these dial-in meetings and some people are testifying or speaking remotely through Zoom or some other platform, there's often a lag, and you could hear it. But he tried to tell her there's a delay, but she would have nothing of it, and so she really got after him.
It's unbelievable. I mean, so she just shows this antagonism in the courtroom towards them. I mean, what do you make of what's the reason here? Have they done something to provoke her, or what do you think is causing this?
Well, I think they're probably dealing with what the defendants, the J6ers, have dealt with the DC courts, is some very deep bias. And in fact, in the first hearing that they had before this judge, Judge Reyes, back in August, the Robert Stick, the Judicial Watch attorney, brought up the issue of bias. And he actually pointed right at her, said that they had a transcript where she was describing January 6th as an insurrection. And another judge had opined in public on the record that there's just no way anyone would convince him that this wasn't a justified shooting. So they brought that up. And one of the reasons they wanted to change the venue of this lawsuit back to San Diego. And that has been going on, fighting about that for probably about 4 months now. But, I went back and looked at the transcripts from all the hearings that have taken place in DC on this case. And she got after the same attorney on the very first hearing and threatening him with contempt of court because he wasn't answering a question that she wanted a particular answer, I think. And she wasn't getting it. So she threatened him with contempt, and it made it pretty dicey for them. It's walking on eggshells, not knowing what's going to set the judge off.
So let's go back to Ashli Babbitt and that day, the story you just told. There is a character known as Helmet Boy, who we were just talking about. We didn't use the words Helmet Boy, but this is someone who is breaking. This is the guy breaking that glass right just before she is shot. And you told this story about how she stood up to him in this article, which was very interesting. But he's also now in more trouble himself.
Yeah, Zachary Alam is, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison for his January 6 charges. He was convicted, or he was found guilty by a jury on 10 charges. He ended up being sentenced only on 9 because the Supreme Court tossed out the obstruction of an official proceeding charge, as that the DOJ had used that in an unconstitutional manner. But he created the chaos, and he is at least partially responsible for what took place because he was an agent provocateur. And he was pardoned by President Trump, and his after he got out, I understand he'd been staying in a shelter that's run by some J6 pardonees, but he was arrested on a felony burglary charge in Virginia last week. It was a residential burglary where the police said he walked into someone's home late at night. The house was dark, and was confronted by the son. The mother and son were home, and then the police arrested him. So he's facing 2 charges, 1 felony and 1 misdemeanor for burglary. And he's got quite a criminal record outside of the J6 stuff. This is a very troubled man.
Joe, you and Steve Baker do great work, obviously, on this January 6th. It's still going on. I can't believe that we still have so many stories that are still left untold. So what do you guys have coming up in the works?
Well, we're still, after 4+ years, trying to figure out what happened that day and how it happened and why it happened. We know there were provocateurs in the crowd. Exactly where they all came from is something we're still looking into. And there were individuals that incited some of the worst violence. And if you really drill down, there were maybe 60 defendants, J6ers as you would call them, who got violent that day. So it was actually a fairly small number, but these flare-ups that happened oftentimes just spun out of control. And the police were very heavy-handed with their use of chemicals and with crowd control weapons, flashbangs and other types of devices that it was like whapping a hornet's nest. It was not the approach to use to try to break up that big of a crowd. So we are looking at a number of things that gets into who might have ordered some people to go there and cause trouble. And I think we're going to end up finding, people like to laugh at this kind of stuff and call it a conspiracy, but I think there were a lot of conspiracies that were carried out that day, and we're still trying to figure that out. Because Ashli Babbitt's situation in that hallway, there are at least 22 of those men who have not been identified, publicly anyway, were never charged, were never arrested, and we're still trying to figure out who they are, including some that were acting very suspiciously. So, we were hoping that this lawsuit would get us some of those answers. I'm not sure if it will now, if they're going to settle, but we're just really getting started. And with President Trump in office, we're hopeful that we'll get better access to information because the original January 6th Select Committee destroyed evidence and really buried a lot of its information. So it's kind of going for Congress going back and recreating the wheel.
Well, it's a privilege to have you aboard, and this is one of the most important things to me when I took over as editor-in-chief. Blaze Media will not stop looking into this story because it's critical that we get to the truth, as you very well know, and we appreciate your work.
Yeah, go look at theblaze.com. Joe Hanneman has great work up there, and we're looking forward to everything that you still have yet to unveil. Thanks so much for your time, Joe.
Yep, thank you.